Hello everyone, welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing, Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a doctoral student in psychology, and with me today is Mr. Norman Gayford, a professor of English and philosophy. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover on the show, feel free to email us at fromnowhereto-nothingpodcast@gmail.com or contact us on our Facebook page. A couple of days ago, I laid on my back with safety glasses and a rain jacket as fireworks exploded overhead, covering me in ash. Needless to say, I enjoy this aspect of America's independence celebrations. But why? What is the purpose? And why do I enjoy such a thing when others find it terrifying? Is terror a positive and necessary part of the phenomenon? When it comes to pleasant experiences, we all seek them, but what qualifies and how we engage with them varies substantially between us. Today we're exploring, and hopefully providing, entertainment.
I think we will.
So I don't know if we'll release it or not, but we're doing a video test for another podcast that I'm starting. So it's a little bit strange. Even just the sound, right? I get so used to the studio with all the acoustic treatment.
Yes, I'm noticing that too.
I can hear the echoes and the vibrations a little bit, so it's a little strange. So I'm sure that my cat Leo will join us at some point. So if you hear some meows or if you see him jump up in my chair, we're gonna roll with it. But I figure, entertainment is a good episode to do a video element with. So we'll see how it goes and if the test is successful. But
the whole idea of entertainment is so ancient and always present and always part of being human that we can go so many directions with this. So I want to thank Adam for asking us to talk about this.
Yeah. Tell us, this was a listener request, right?
Yeah, this was a listener request. Adam's a person who happens to be in a science fiction fantasy book group that I'm in at Warsaw Public Library, and it's called Hobbits and Hyperdrives. And we have lovely conversations, but this one's going to go wherever it goes, and it is fun to have people say, "Here, please talk about this."
Yeah, no, and it's going to be deep. It's going to be real deep because it's a multifaceted topic in a number of important ways. So give us the overview. What is entertainment?
That sounds like a setup for a song in a musical, but it's been done. So we look at, let's start with etymology again. And so two Latin and French put it together. Inter, which means among, and tenere, to hold. Those are the derivations. Among and to hold. Wait, what does that have to do with entertainment, right? Huh. To hold mutually, or to hold intertwined. To engage, to keep occupied, to hold the attention of. And then it became merrymaking and pleasure and delight and hospitality oriented. So it's just all in the space of a couple hundred years. So by the 1530s, a provision for support of a retainer, a manner of social behavior, because we're so involved in routines and rituals and how are we supposed to behave. That's obsolete. But entertainment became the amusement of someone in the 1610s, that which entertains, which is tautological in the 1650s, and public performance meant to amuse in the 1700s. But it's also in the 1500s to have a guest, to gratify, to allow something to take your mind and hold it for a while. So there's that holding again. And so, you ask people what entertainment is. Well, it's fun. It's taking my mind off things, but it's actually putting your mind on something else and holding your mind so your mind isn't here, it's here instead.
Yeah. No, that's a really rich etymology, and it strikes at a lot of the positive and negative or critical aspects of entertainment that we're going to see as we talk about what philosophers have said about it.
Yes.
So do you want to start with what historical philosophers' views on entertainment?
Yes. And you chime in too, because you've done your own backgrounding on it. So in no particular order, but we'll do Plato. Plato was talking about music as, and he didn't call it entertainment. That wasn't the word yet, but that music had a lot of emotional power, and thus it could create states of being in a person. I think we realize, you're a musician. You realize I do listening to music and playing music. If I'm noodling around trying to play some really basic ragtime, that does a different thing to how one feels than to listening to a symphony. Mm-hmm. And so it has the power because the music is an imitation of the sounds we make in emotional states, Plato said. I'm not so sure about that, but and then Aristotle, Plato's student, says music's power to influence our emotional states is enormous, and thus we have to be careful how we use music.
Yeah, so there's sort of an opposing view there, right? Because Plato talks about mimesis, is that right?
Yes.
Is that the correct phrase?
Yeah.
So, entertainment is as imitating reality, but not being real. And Aristotle kind of takes the opposite view that, especially that art can be cathartic, right? That you can have a way of expressing real emotions through entertainment.
Yes, and that is essentially the purpose of art. But you see, it has to have a purpose. Even back to Aristotle, entertainment can't just be entertainment. There's the notion of the wild and the chaotic and something that might take you over in an emotional or psychological sense. Also, psychological, not a word that they had, but we know what they were talking about.
Yeah, and so that's where entertainment is going to get really tricky as we go through the conversation, is because we're going to talk about, there's aesthetic components to it, there's ethical and moral components to it, there's psychological components to it, and depending on which lens you're looking through, you can draw pretty vastly different conclusions about the purpose and, not just the purpose, but also the effects of art on individuals and society.
Yes, because there is an almost inevitable, seemingly human cant toward purposive or utility. And so Kant was talking about morality with entertainment when he essentially saying the duty of entertainment is moralistic. And so that's the kind of literature that Heidegger is talking about human pain, and that entertainment involves being exposed to or getting to understand human pain. Which, if we went into horror and that kind of thing, which we might, there's doorways there. Kafka, a hunger artist. There's a term now. There are 4 different kinds of, we can get to that, but the art of the negativity. So taking pleasure in annihilation. So I suppose we could transfer that quickly to pop culture, which is entirely its own realm, which we explore a lot. Watching the Death Star blow up. Or, in Doctor Who, an entire universe is being taken down. And, hey, we're safe in our homes. We're watching this.
Right.
But there's the idea of witnessing something horrible or sublime, and thus experiencing it, but experiencing it safely.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think about, Kafka and Lovecraft and like a lot of I like horror fiction. I really like it. Yeah. Some of my favorite stuff, even Dostoevsky, right? And in a more very realistic kind of sense is horror. But I'm a happy-go-lucky person. I don't, and horror in other genres, like in movies and television stuff, I don't really care for, depending on how it's done. But yeah, so the human pain element is interesting, and if you think about it musically, I think certainly a lot of music really has that kind of bend to it.
Opera certainly does.
Yeah, and even like pop culture music, some of it that might have a major scale, and have a happy, it may sound happy, the music may sound happy, but lots of times the lyrics are sad, even with the good songs.
So it's a genre like, well, if not a genre, a style, screamo, or the guttural shouting.
Yeah.
That I think was a style that emerged from Germany, but certainly suffused the world.
Yeah, and that's an interesting example because, talking about Aristotle and catharsis, right? When they've done psychological studies on these people concerned, like, all right, so are people that listen to like this sort of violent heavy metal music, are they more violent or angry in real life? No, it's just the opposite. Like, they're actually less angry and violent than regular people. So maybe the catharsis plays through. But yeah, so Kant, he's got an interesting view, and at least to me, it seems very intuitive, right? In Critique of Judgment, he's talking about how, aesthetics is subjective, but it seeks universal agreement.
Yes.
So it's sort of this thing, it's kind of what we talk about on a regular basis where we go, okay, everything's not relativistic. There's something out there, but everybody's going to view that something a different way. So what do we make of it? And I think that the short answer is it's hard to make anything.
It's hard to make anything of it, but Kant was, I think, trying to make the assertion, the argument even that we need to seek the higher plane of art, so to speak. That's where the levels of what's good art, high art, capital H, and low art, lower and capital L. And
so there needs to be like sort of an educational or virtuous element to what you're trying to do. There's a definite ethical or moral component to what it is you're trying to do. So contrast that with Hume, who, Hume, I've got a lot of respect for. And I think in a lot of ways he was very intelligent and right on about a lot of things, but I don't agree with him on this, right? He talks about the standard of taste and how taste is subjective, but consensus among qualified critics will establish standards. And I think about sommeliers or art critics and stuff. And you know, how many times have we seen the psychological test where you pour a $10 wine into a $1,000 bottle and all the experts go, oh yes, I'm sensing notes of this and this is great. It's very high quality, right? Or art galleries, you hear about some guy leaving his water bottle on the ground and people come around, oh, it's high art, right? So I don't trust expert judgments, right? I think that, which isn't to say that art, can't be critically examined, but I think that people, there's a highly subjective component to it that you can't just ignore. I don't think you can put the critique and the judgment of it in the hands of a few experts when everybody is capable of making their own judgments about what is good.
People are capable of making their judgments. I will counter with that only to say, no, David Hume doesn't get to be the sole or the exclusive guide of what I find worthy. But we can learn, going back to the sommelier, there's an old acquaintance whose daughter grew up and became one and does well with it. And I believe that she can detect the notes of chocolate or the hint of mulberry or whatever it is. I believe that if I worked hard enough at it, I might learn to find those things. But in this case, my taste is low. I don't mind if it's a $10 bottle of wine or a $12 bottle of wine. If it tastes good to me, that's good enough. That's the entertainment.
Yeah. And so, I do agree. So, certain qualities in art are universally recognized.
Yeah.
I think I agree with that, right? There are certain, head, points that you can say, okay, I think that these are sort of universally agreed upon. And perhaps experts are better at sort of defining or identifying those than a lay person. So, if you're tasting wine, okay, well, if it's not fermented or it's made out of, a vegetable instead of a fruit, right? Terrible examples, but
suddenly we've gotten into the wine.
Yeah. And I don't like wine, so I'm a terrible one to talk about it. But yeah, so I think that I do agree with that. There are universal aspects that perhaps experts are better at defining or identifying or that sort of thing. But then I almost think you get back to Kant's position in that case, right? Where you're saying, okay, well, yes, there's a large subjective element, but there's universally recognized.
Yeah. If you say that that's the only thing you can learn from, or that's the only thing you ought to be able to enjoy, then I push back against that limitation, because we know from our own experience that's not the case.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the purpose of entertainment then? Why do I like the fireworks experience, right? Why do I want to be so close that I can feel the ground shake and I'm getting covered in ash, right?
I don't know.
I want to see them,
But I no, the question is, my wife and I were talking about this morning, and I asked her, and she gave a very thorough answer that's essentially what we've been reading in our backgrounding, but more to the point, what we know from experience, which is that which takes us away, that which amuses us, that which engages us, as opposed to something else which would engage us. I mean, the idea of vegging out, as we used to say, or whatever, you come home, turn on the television. Are you watching the show to be immersed in the show, or you're just sitting because it's a rerun, you already know everything that happens, and it's just comfortable noise? I'm not putting a judgment on that about what's good or what's bad. I'm not going to do that. But I think there are different kinds of entertainment. And I think that depends on your psychological makeup, the whole individuality of the ontology of you says, I kind of like ashes falling out and feeling the boom. I don't know.
Yeah. And so it's kind of gets interesting, right? Because, all of a sudden, you can see a very sort of complex, nuanced element of entertainment emerging just within a single individual, right? Because I think with fireworks, it's definitely like a perceptual or sensational experience, right? Lights, colors, sound, right? And it's this full engagement and immersement in this thing. And I think that extends to other mediums of art as well for me, right? Like, instrumental music, really it's purely aesthetic in nature. But then our show is probably as close as you can get to the other end of the spectrum, right? So usually we don't have a video element. So there's nothing to look at. There's nothing to smell or taste or touch, right? You're just listening to us talk. And our primary purpose isn't to provide entertainment. We're not on here, telling jokes. There's no rim shots or anything, right? It's mostly educational. It sort of is aspiring to what some of the philosophers that we've talked about thought entertainment should be, right? Okay, well, there should be a higher moral purpose, a higher intellectual purpose. You should be striving in order to provide something. But you see, so both the examples that I've given, opposite ends of the spectrum, but to me, right, I don't see one as necessarily being a better form of entertainment than the other. It's just they're different types.
Yeah, it engages differently. What you just described is a lot of different kinds of engagement. And of course, because we're such clever animals, we make up terms that riff off of entertainment. So you were just talking about edutainment, a word I acknowledge that it exists. What does that mean? Let's look at that word. What is edutainment? Are we doing edutainment? I'm
think
certainly
so.
glancing at this screen and I don't find myself entertaining, and I'd rather not look.
Right. And who knows, right? Because as we talk about every week, defining boundaries is very difficult. But I think for sure we have done it in the past, specifically with video episodes where we've looked at, episodes of The Mandalorian or something, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, I think that's definitely edutainment, right? We're taking entertainment, but then we are educating listeners by dissecting it philosophically and coming to, insights on it. So I think that for sure is edutainment, right? But this sort of raises another question, which is entertainment its own concept, or is it an aspect of other activities?
Oh, well, first, it points to you. Good question. Is it its own concept? I don't think it can be its entirely own concept because it is connected, tethered to that which you are doing. I mean, we're back to what's the sound of a tree falling if no one's there? Mm. There's not entertainment if people aren't involved. Well, I'll back off. I don't know. There may be a universal being that somehow gets entertainment from watching stars collide and galaxies go poof. But
this comes back to last week's discussion of personhood, right? Because sometimes my cat will sit here and watch TV out the window, right? So I think that's his form of entertainment, but is he a person? I don't know. But that's farther into the weeds than we want to be.
Pull us back.
But so I'm tending towards thinking that entertainment is an aspect of other activities. Can it be a concept in itself? I almost would think that purely aesthetic forms of entertainment would tend to be closer to that, right? Because what we're doing right now, there's ulterior motives, right? We're trying to educate you, right? We're trying to get you to think critically, right? There's other things.
We're trying to lure you into having fun with conversation.
Yeah. So there's other things happening. But with fireworks, right? Is that pure entertainment?
That's sensual. Is it pure entertainment? It's pure sensuality. The feeling of the ash, the feeling of the rumble, the crash in your ears. I would think that's way over on that scale of sensuality, as in employing all of the senses. Now I got to test this. So if I go to a movie, whether it's an IMAX screen or not, I remember when Dolby Sound happened. Now I'm sounding really old, right? Sensurround, it was called. and so something exploded. You felt it on all sides of you. Once upon a time, they tried a thing called smell-o-vision, but it didn't work so well. I hear it's coming back. There's going to be attempts in theaters. So there are sensual appeals. That is, we're watching, we're seeing something, but we're at a distance. Even a movie theater is not the same thing as at all as experiencing a live theater presentation. I think part of the entertainment of that is similar to fireworks or has one connection is we don't know for sure what's going to happen next. If we watch a movie, then we watch it again. We already know the story. We can read the Odyssey many times and get many new things out of it, and it is entertaining, but we know the story. With the fireworks going off, we know how it's supposed to go. We don't know what they're going to look like. We don't know if they're going to blow up early. We don't know if you're going to have a dud. I guess you'd know whether or not the ash feels warm when you've been there once. You see what I mean, though? There's different removes.
Yeah.
And I think that determines how we are taking the entertainment.
Yeah, I think that what would pure entertainment look like? I think that question sort of highlights the difficulty in divorcing it from other concepts. But I would tend towards aesthetic appreciation if I had to identify it, right? And so I think the fireworks or instrumental music or, admiring a painting, something along these lines. But even then, there's a extreme subjective element, right? Because sometimes when I'm watching fireworks, I'm just enjoying the sound, the light, but other times I'm looking at it and I go, I wonder what element they used to get that color, or I wonder what they do to get it to do this long, drawn out thing rather than just disappearing, right? When I listen to music, right, I'll listen to the same song over and over and over again. And the first time I'm just enjoying the power of the piece, but then the second time I'm going, what are the drums doing? What are the bass doing? Right, exactly.
You are studying, but you're still having an experience of the piece of work. There's a different kind of remove of the analytical. Are you being analytical the first time? Maybe not. Maybe you can't turn the analysis off. Maybe you're not you personally, but a person, whoever the person is, maybe they can never just stop thinking about it. I know that I have sometimes annoyed people in my life because when they come out of the movie theater, we come out of a movie theater and I want to talk about what we've seen. And was that good? Yeah, that was good. What made it good? Well, it was good music. Okay. But, and that doesn't go very far as a conversation. I don't need to talk about a complete soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, but on the other hand, I love going to the movies with my son, who's a musician, who we will talk about the soundtrack of whomever it was and how is that different from a different soundtrack he did for a film, or does he just seem to be cruising on his laurels, or is he breaking new ground? And that's engaging and that's fun. And so that's entertaining in itself. The conversation after the fact of an experience of art leads one to re-experience the art at a distance in temporal space and time, and still getting more joy out of it. But then there's the other thing about space and time. When much of the artwork that we take, that we enjoy, it wasn't necessarily or uniformly certainly enjoyed at its time. There are things we call masterpieces that were not appreciated, and it took time. Well, okay, time and what else? It's not just time. There's time and there's rethinking. There's time and there's multiple exposures. There's time and there's the expert training of what were you really seeing, what materials. How did Van Gogh get that material? Well, he was using stuff that probably led to his death. And so then you go to another place. So it's recursive. Entertainment it doesn't just let you go.
Yeah, it's not static, right? As you were just saying, a lot of pieces that we now consider masterpieces, I'd say if you look back at history, you really have a 50-50 shot at best of being appreciated in your time as an artist in a lot of cases, at least for things that are universally recognized today. Which raises the question, how does society influence entertainment, and how does entertainment influence society, right? We've talked a lot so far about sort of the definitional aspects of entertainment and viscerally and psychologically how they affect an individual. But now if we zoom out a little bit, and I think this is probably the question that Adam was more asking about, right? Big picture, modern times, and, looking at the historical view as well. How do those two interact?
Well, I'll start with something that'll just go bump in the night. I think that one of the single most influential pieces of entertainment in the history of humankind has been religion. I think that because it is a constant attempt to engage people in a story, a whole cluster of stories. And if you think you're losing a particular audience, you find other ways to try to do it that draws them in. Many churches, despite how the media is presenting how the country is, our country, many churches are small and dying, as in they have populations that are what I meant, geriatric populations. In many churches, young people don't come. Some churches, they do. But why? Well, we've got praise bands. We got a lot of noise now. And I don't mean noise in an insulting way, but praise bands. We got all kinds of activities for kids. We've got things that are just stay. I've got something else to show you. And it's not that the pastors, that's not their primary purpose, but they're trying to keep people there. That's a localized in a phenomenon in our own time. But I think that when you go to the idea of fear and living vicariously, and you are telling people how the world works, how the metaphysical world works, and what's going to happen to you if or then, and you were engaging in a kind of scare that you package as certainty. I always question the certainty because I'm a rational being, but I think that there's an entertainment value, or not value, an entertainment influence that is undeniable across the history of the species. So that's where I start.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So it's a recognized phenomenon, right? For the past 30 years, the number of nuns has been growing, which is people who define themselves as religiously unaffiliated. But within that context, they've discovered that really patterns of spirituality have not changed at all, right? So people tend to be as spiritual as they have in the past, but they tend to not be religiously affiliated. And I had never thought about it. I had sort of attributed that to advances in, technology or scientific theories or paradigms that sort of contradict religious views.
Yeah.
But do you think entertainment plays a large part in that? Religious institutions and things used to be a larger source of entertainment and now they can't compete with new mediums.
But I think that they attempt to compete with, not in contrast to, but with mediums. Make movies, make, whether it's Christian or what it's not. I'm not centering it on one ideology, but make movies, make video games, generate music that may not even on the surface at first sound like the ideology, but then is drawing people. I absolutely think that religions are, they evolve, or Darwin works for social things like religions too. And then you said technology. What is more entertaining than technology? From our grousing about it, our complaining about it, our use of it, here we are.
Yeah.
And we were talking before the show about, and at a meeting this week about how you were setting up the sound and everything, and you were obviously having fun working. And so we haven't said having fun yet for entertainment, but I think it's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll get there for sure. And I think that, when I'm watching fireworks, I'm having fun. When I'm listening to music, I'm having fun. When I'm doing this, I'm having fun, right? So I think that fun spans the gamut from the aesthetic to the moral or virtuous.
Especially because can fun be, I'm trying to pull it together, the big picture you said with Adam asking the question. Can it be fun to risk your life? Some people would say so. Climb a mountain, rock climbing, no matter how many safeties features you have set, there's a possibility you can get hurt. Well, there's a possibility you can get hurt just between one breath and the next two. I think entertainment shows us precisely what we don't want to see, which is that everything is fragile and everything is contingent, and there is nothing that you can really completely depend upon in terms of mortality. And so the horror films or driving fast or whatever one chooses, when you were putting yourself in any kind of risk, I think you are involved in a kind of performative entertainment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, based upon the things that we've talked about, I'm a person who's been in some of these scenarios, and I think there is an element to it, right? I think that a lot of the things that are sort of aroused in you during passive entertainment are the same things in a safer way that are engaged in active entertainment, I guess you'd say, which is things that could be more engaging at least, but more dangerous at most, right?
I was talking with my granddaughter at the carnival. You and Amanda went to the carnival. Well, we went and she was talking to me about what rides she might go on. And she'd already gone the previous day with her parents. And I said, well, whatever you want to go on that allows you, there's a range for size, and she's grown a lot, so that's not so limiting now. She's thinking about the swing. I don't remember the proper title for it, but it's very fast. And there are a lot of seats, right? And so that swing, she was thinking, I might try that this year, Grandpa, because she got really scared last year. I said, sure, if you want to, but I can't go on it with you. And if that makes a difference, something to think about. And she finally decided, nope, but we were going to go on the equivalent of a tilt-a-whirl, a dragon something or other. And I don't do tilt-a-whirls well, but she always wants to get me on one. And it's entertaining to her to see how I respond. There's a different kind of entertainment, the vicarious or the Schadenfreude kind of thing where I'm handling this better than you, Grandpa, right? So she would turn the handle, and I'm trying to turn the handle back and say, no, don't do that. And it was entertaining. I was fine. I didn't get off and get sick. She thought it was funny. I was entertained by watching how she was being entertained. And so it was this recursive process again.
Yeah. And so thinking about this, again, big picture, what we've looked at, society and entertainment. Roland Barthes said, in Mythologies talks about how cultural phenomena communicate ideological messages, right? Everyday objects and entertainment forms carry cultural myths. So I think that seems pretty obvious in religious context, right? Because religion and myth, and again, not positing the truth or falsity of anything, but merely the inform, have a lot in common. And then, of course, when we look at pop culture media, right? The myths are there, right? It carries through, right? I just wrote a book, it'll be out at the end of the summer. And part of the exercise that I was trying to do in that book was look at, given mythology and the way that human storytelling works, how much of it can I capitalize on the major points, like, Hume was talking about, and how much can I subvert some of those points and still keep that sort of hero's journey and hero's cycle in place in order to provide entertainment that, it sort of identifies and coheres with what we expect, while also providing unexpected elements that don't render it boring, right?
Yeah.
And so
freshen it up. But pop culture does this.
Yeah.
And there's a book that's going to sound funny, but whenever I do research, I always find new books that I want to read. And there's a book that I bumped into doing this. I got to read the preface, and that's it. It's by Andy Hamilton. It's out this year. It's called Art and Entertainment, a Philosophical Exploration. I'm going to read that book. But in the preface and the descriptions of the book, one part of the book talks about, while art should pass the test of time, entertainment must pass the test of its own time. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So that Van Gogh is Van Gogh is Van Gogh. And we learn to appreciate it or we don't. And we can appreciate it without anybody trying to teach us or not, but we could actually learn to appreciate things that we didn't know that we were seeing with the authority of background that helps us see things. That doesn't mean that's the only view. And that's what we were talking about earlier. Okay. But pop culture has to endure the test of its own time. Well, you're like a TV show. Well, it runs three, as the Brits would say, 3 series, or it runs 3 seasons, and then it's done. And you say, no, bring it back. I want more of that show. And well, it just wasn't making money. But enough of us were watching it. Isn't that worth something? Nope. It's got to reach X level or we don't have it. That's the mass created version. And it has to keep pumping out, and it has to keep giving us that fix that we want right then.
And that's what we're going to talk about next. But you said something that was really interesting that I want to get at first, which is the relationship between art and entertainment, right? Because I think that we'd sort of assume that if they're not synonymous, that there's an intimate relationship between the two. But then I think that, given what you just said, it doesn't necessarily seem that way, right? Because, Van Gogh, a good example, somebody who in his time, right, isn't, and maybe not so much him, but there's been plenty of artists, right, who in their time are not appreciated at all, and in retrospect, they are appreciated. Whereas with entertainment, you need to be appreciated in your time, but it doesn't really matter if it doesn't hold up. You need to hold up to be art, but you don't need to hold up to be entertainment. I think about this with music all the time, right? Every 10 years, the musical aesthetic changes. And lots of times when I listen back, I go, what were people thinking, with this with this synthesizer or this snare drum reverb or whatever it was? What were you doing, And then 40 years later, it comes back around and people like it again for another decade, and then it goes out again, right?
Well, there's also something else we talked about, which is nostalgia.
Right, yeah.
Right. But then one can appreciate after you've generated what you've made now the 11th album.
Yeah, I'm getting up there.
Okay. And you know more about what you're trying to create and how you're trying to create it. And I don't think you cringe when you go back and listen to some of the other stuff that you did at the start, but you did select for the last one pieces all across the spectrum of you. But I think when you're 50 and you go back and listen to those, you may have a different response again. You may say, okay, with the equipment I had at the time, with the instrument I had at the time, this was worth experimenting with. I'm not sure I would do that again. And so this is where I think in the opening to Hamilton's book, he says that art and pop culture entertainment are interdependent, not codependent, but interdependent, because there's still the work of criticism that has an influence on it. There's the work of the universality of how things are generated, whether it's a jingle for an advertisement or it's a song that's going to that lasts for decades. There's still a creative process involved. And so I think that's what he's maybe saying. I can't say for sure until I read the book. He may be saying that that's the interdependency. But yeah, there's a fizz value. There always has been to pop culture.
And so,
fizz.
Yeah, so I think that art and entertainment, right? They're not necessarily something that's coupled necessarily in a unbreakable way. But I think that a lot of it has to do with intent as well. And what I come back to here is like kids' TV shows, right? I remember growing up in the 90s, and I'm not going to mention any shows by names, but like going back and watching some of them as an adult, you go, okay, well, it's very obvious the only purpose of this was to sell toys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's other ones that I watch where I go, okay, well, the primary purpose of this was to sell toys. But I can tell that there was a writer who really wanted to tell a story, right? He really wanted to do something. This wasn't just a day job. This, to him, had some meaning or some purpose to it, right? And I think that brings together all the things we've been talking about so far, right? Is this idea of, it just has to be sensual or, perceptual, or it's aesthetic. It's, it's doing these things. So it's entertainment.
Right.
Whereas, again, Hume and some of these other people have that moralistic bend to where they go, oh, no. And even John Stuart Mill, right, in a universalist type of way, would be like, no, you need to do something that at least has some value to for a number of people beyond just, the sort of superficial aspects. And so that gets us to what you were talking about before, which is how does commercialism change entertainment, right? How does that affect how we interact with it or how it's presented to us?
All right, I'm going to cite a paraphrase, perhaps cite a Star Trekism. Captain Kirk is in a very difficult position with the Klingons, and he's talking with his friends, and he says, "They've got us right where we want them." And I love that phrase because I think it expresses in a goofy way, but still, it expresses the interdependence of any given situation. People are complaining now about, well, we've shot the bolt on superhero films. It's not going to, you can't do anything new with it. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course you can, but if you're going by a formula and you're determined, and what your first and only concern is profits, and your first and only concern is, well, they liked it before, we better do the same thing again, that's going to run out. Now, human beings are notorious for doing the same thing over and over, no matter what. That's why we have that phrase about if you always did what you always do what you always did, and so on. So I think that pop culture is fizzy. I don't mind that. I can enjoy and do classic literature, revisit it and see fresh things in it because of age or experiences. But I can also watch an Avengers film. And sometimes you feel like you have to apologize for that. They're like, what did I just do? Oh, it's this goofy thing from Star Trek. I think that's a way of casting a coin to the people who say that's mindless pep. You shouldn't be mindless pep. Okay. How do people form a working team to try to accomplish something? How do they handle failure? Because they do fail. I told somebody was asking me, why do you always watch these films? I said, it's for how the characters end up handling how they fail. Nobody ever fails in superhero films. I said, you haven't been watching.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. People say comic books or superheroes or whatever, and they said that there can't be anything useful in that. Oh, but there is in Hercules and Ajax and let's see, the gods intruding in the battles on Earth, and that's classic literature. Well, that's how it's told. Well, it wasn't even written originally. It was storytelling, right? So I refuse. I push back on this kind of thing. Nonetheless, there's a lot of crap.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it comes down to kind of what I was trying to accomplish with my book and with my music, right? Whenever I create art, I have two aims in mind, right? One is to adhere to the pattern that people expect, and the other one is to disrupt that in such a way that they don't know what to expect, right? So those two things are almost completely at odds with each other, and I think that a good artist is always trying to do both of those. And perhaps what makes a good artist is how successful you are, or perhaps what makes good art is just how people, whether or not people are surprised, regardless of how the artist does it, right? Because, and me and my wife go through this a lot, right? We have very different tastes in everything. And so lots of times she'll be listening to a song or watching a movie or something. I go, this is the cheesiest, corniest thing ever. And she goes, no, I like it for this, and this reason. I go, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. And then I'll be listening to something or watching something, and she'll go, oh, and this isn't cheesy, corny, and terrible. And I go, yeah, but I like it for this, and this reason, right? And that highlights, going back to the Kantian view, right? And what we talk about every episode, how there is something out there. There's an objective something out there. But the problem is humans are not objective. Humans are subjective. And so everybody's trying to look at it from a different angle. And we've talked before about the three blind men and the elephant, right? You've got one holding a trunk and one holding a tail and one holding a side. They all have, but none of them can see the whole thing. You have a different view of it. And so what stories you've been exposed to throughout your life, right? How you've engaged with them, the lessons that you've learned from them, how you've applied those to your life, how you've encountered real situations in your life, and the stories you've told yourself about the things that you've encountered.
Because we fictionalize our lives all the time. Mm-hmm. We come home from work or whatever, it's a situation, and we tell a story. How was your day? Well, that's, and we pick and we choose. We curate. We say that, okay, I'm not going to talk about this 3 hours, but this one thing happened. Was that one thing so sensational that it affected the whole day? Apparently, because I wanted to tell a story about it. See, I think entertainment is, if you to go for the broad stroke and try to pull some of it together, entertainment is agency, or it is a product of agency, but it's also an active, fluid relationship with agency. How I choose to spend my time. And it's only when we get into the value judgments of people saying, you're wasting your time by sitting and drawing pictures. First, it's sad that you think so. Second, I don't really care because I don't feel like I'm wasting my time. And you've got the world all together, so you know exactly how many minutes you're spending on something. And that was so important, it changed the world. Well, maybe it did. Maybe it changed your world. Maybe it changed your localized context. This might change mine. Mine isn't better. I think that we have this constant need to say, anything you can do, I can do better, or if I can't, then I'm not even going to try. The entertainment is the agency, the choosing of where I'm going to have my attention be taken. to go back to the definition.
Hmm.
I can do this or I can do that. I have the choice of this or that. We've talked about free will before, so we won't go there, but let's assume for a moment I have the choice of going out and trimming bushes or of painting. And one day I might trim the bush, or 1 hour, and another hour it's okay. Now I get to do some art because I really want to do that. It wasn't that I didn't want to trim the bush because I take joy in that. I can see the results instantly. The art, sometimes I can see the result instantly, sometimes not. Both are entertaining. If I'm out doing work on a path and I'm trimming and I'm listening to the birds and I'm feeling myself suffused with the sound of the breeze, and I'm in that moment and I look over and suddenly there's a deer, I couldn't have generated that. Somebody could have made that experience up for me and made it a virtual reality thing, I suppose, but it was genuine. And it was entertaining because I was enwrapped having 30 seconds with a deer munching berries about 30 feet away from me and talking to it and it not running away. I'm obviously not a threat. So anyway, I think there's that choice that we have to acknowledge.
Yeah. And so I think that you've alighted on something that is pretty interesting in the context of what we've been talking about. So far, we've sort of couched this discussion of entertainment in terms of the uses, the utilitarian aspects of entertainment, and then kind of the negative or useless or sensual parts. But that's not really how it is, right? If you think of entertainment as being sort of suffused into other activities, then it kind of has a component to it that is always serving some purpose, right? I think at our last meeting that we had this week, I mentioned, I find everything interesting, right? And so as a result, right, the whole world is entertaining to me, and that entertainment leads to deeper engagement and deeper insight into various aspects, which is good, right? I think that it's unequivocally good. So now the question is to bring us back to the question that we've sort of we kind of brushed aside and went into a different place that was beneficial, but we'll return to it. How does commercialism affect that, right? So I think that for me, right, does commercialism affect how I engage with entertainment? And how so? I think undoubtedly it does. It must, right? But I think that if you're critically engaging with things, you're much more likely to identify when that's happening and whether or not that's something that you want to engage with, right? Okay, I can look at the trailer of a movie and then based off that, understand, okay, well, they're showing me the most exciting parts out of context, with a soundtrack that has been curated to play on those emotional aspects.
Yeah.
Is it worth spending the money for this ticket, or do I really think that they're putting lipstick on a pig here? Am I making a snap value judgment based on that and not giving it a fair chance, right? So there's a little bit more engagement, right? But I think that where commercialism negatively affects entertainment is, I think that, would you say that the responsibility, and I know this is gonna set you off, but do you think that the responsibility is on the individual to not let commercialism impact how they perceive entertainment?
You think that's going to set me up?
I think so. I think so.
Do I think that the commercialism, that's the individual's responsibility to resist?
The individual's responsibility, yes, to decide how commercialism affects their views of entertainment.
I think it's I think it's the individual's duty to try. Resistance is not futile. And I'm totally caught up in commercial culture. So one aspect of it, not all of it. I don't know when I enjoy Instagram because of the posting the reels and things from people that I love are coming up there and projects and so on. But I can stumble into a place, don't know who that singer is, don't know what that is, don't know, and then I'm curious and say, well, I've never heard that kind of music before. Maybe I should give it a listen. but I'm making choices. I think we have to resist, though, to say, well, I'm just going to go to a Marvel movie because it's a Marvel movie. No, I need to want to choose, and ask myself why I'm choosing to do that, at least sometimes. Is that how you thought I was going to get set up?
No, I think that where the gray area comes in, right, is I mean, you could look at several cases. One would be individuals who we perceive to not have the capacity or faculty to choose for themselves, such as children, right? We do so much commercializing and advertising to children.
Yes. Yeah.
Who, which when you take advantage of the sensual and perceptual aspects of things, they don't have the prefrontal capacities to resist. And so then they say, I want it, right?
Of course. You want me. You're lighting up 5 different firework candlesticks just to see if how poor.
This is the grand finale.
I know,
We're going right
grand
now.
finale. Okay. All right. So yes, absolutely. Commercialism, individuals we need to resist to the extent that we don't just give children everything the television tells them they want. They see an ad on YouTube. Oh, I love it. I want that. No, I think it's not lecturing at them about money or anything necessarily. It's just saying, no. All right, here's the rocket. Here's the fireworks. It is when a culture, a society turns things that were not intended to be entertainment into entertainment that I set off mightily. Thus, politics. Thus, because as I said before, I think religion was partly meant to be entertaining. Politics, well, okay, there's that built in, but politics in this serving your locality as you're doing in committees and so on, serving, what do you give to your collective that, and what does it do for you, and what's the balance of that? And that's always that discussion. It shouldn't be a 3-ring circus. You shouldn't call a debate something that isn't a debate. We don't even know what debates are now. I mean, there are many, many, many people among us. We know what a debate is supposed to be, what the debate format is, how debate works. It's never the best thing for political venues anyway, because debate is about trying to win an argument, just like law is about law is entertainment, but television has made it, that hasn't it? Who can win, not what the truth is.
Yeah, Amanda and I were talking about this the other day. I can't remember the name of the guy, but there was, back when American Idol first started, they had a guy on who was not good, right? And he became a meme, and they tore him apart and stuff. And she goes, you know what? Looking back at this, I don't like this. And I go, I never liked it, because you knew they had you had to audition in front of multiple people, and there was a bunch of good people that they rejected because they weren't good enough. But they let this guy through because it would be entertaining to see this terrible singer and dancer get up here and make a fool of himself and watch Simon Cowell tear him to shreds. I go, that's morally cruelty. Wrong, right? And I will draw.
It is.
I will make that distinction, right? And so, yeah, I think that in that case, right, using the downfall of others for entertainment, or commercially advertising to children, but I don't even think it's children, right? I think that there's definitely certain pathways in the human brain that are susceptible to this. Usually, devoted to things that are the most primal, right? Sexual or food or violence, these things that are deep psychological drives. I think that you can format entertainment in such a way that you're taking advantage of the electrochemical messengers in the brain that stimulate these things without providing. And we've talked about the aesthetic part of it. Is that just aesthetic entertainment, right? We'll use ancient Rome, right, where you had erotic murals on the walls and you had gladiators killing each other in the Colosseum and stuff. Is that just aesthetic entertainment? Or is there a moral element to entertainment that must be acknowledged, right?
Well, I think it's entertainment. I think that murals can be aesthetic. I say can. I think some are attempted to be, some not. But is there? I think it's a reflective of the aspects of the culture, but it doesn't speak to the entirety of the culture. I think that's where we fall short. Rome is an imperial state. Imperial states do vile and awful things. They sometimes bring decent things into the world as well, but that's not necessarily the first principle. But to judge all of Rome on the Colosseum, and I know that's not what you're doing, but to do that would be to miss the deeper complexity. Epictetus. I want to go to Epictetus. We didn't mention him. Not the father of Stoicism, but very influential. And he said he essentially was saying to people, don't waste your time on mindless entertainment. He didn't use that word, but it was there. But he said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about. It's not that you see a mural. It's how you respond to the mural.
Yeah. So we're talking about deeper engagement with it. And I think that we can go back to what we had discussed about a little bit earlier about, art and entertainment not being synonymous. I think that maybe you can have sensual, carnal entertainment without it being art, right? Without it having any necessarily moral implications. But I think that where we need to consider moral implications is when we start commercializing entertainment, right? I think that that's where it's necessary to have that discussion.
I think it is useful to have that discussion, but I'm always hesitant about this because of the kinds of things we're seeing in the country now, where whole swaths of people won't allow their children to see a statue, a sculpture by Michelangelo, because it shows the male parts. That's ridiculous. That's stunningly ridiculous to me. It defies rationality. It defies knowing ourselves, which, we have a culture when people don't teach people about bodies and kids end up stumbling into things because nobody ever taught them, except maybe they got a class. And now there are lots of places that are not letting those classes happen. Finale.
Yeah.
Boom, boom.
Yeah,
boom.
Yeah. And
here I go.
Yeah. So, Jean Baudrillard talked about, how hyperreality, right? Of, your perception of entertainment, becoming more real to you than what's actually out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we see happening in the political realm. And in, like you were mentioning with Michael, Michelangelo's David, right? If you perceive it to be this way, then that's going to be your reality versus what is actually happening in the real world. Yeah. Which demonstrates the power of entertainment, and therefore why commercialization needs to be thought of, given special consideration.
I think so, and again, to historicize our and I'm going to do this without taking a position. If you have two people who are old, incontestably old, and they're both running for an office, and you find one to seem frail and the other to seem to assert things that aren't true. One is trying to assert things that one finds to be true. What you choose is based on an entertainment value. Oh, it's not entertaining to watch an old guy who's he's got bad moments. But it's really entertaining to watch an old guy pretend he's not an old guy. And I think that we have to ask questions about what we're letting influence us. We're back to Epictetus. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, I feel like we didn't even really scratch the surface of entertainment, because when you were talking to me about, Adam and what he wanted us to talk about, what he wanted us to talk about was sort of, how entertainment has evolved into something that is sort of all encompassing in modern society and our dependence on it. And we didn't really get there today, and we're out of time now, but I'm sure that we can either do entertainment again next week, or we can do a topic that riffs off of it and include it some more, or maybe we'll just talk about it in a future episode. I'm sure it's going to come back up given the context that we've set here. But yeah, it was a fun discussion. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, you can watch it if you want to. I'll probably post it on YouTube just in case you're curious. But otherwise, until next time, keep pondering.